Today I'll be painting this woodblock, which is a sketch of a little seagull from a photo that I took on the pier. This is the color study that I put together, trying to make it really simple. You notice that I made my lines really thick. Had a lot of challenges with lines that are just too thin, so I went all in on thick lines for this block, where I actually have another one up here that I'll be doing in another video. But this is the gull. Yeah, so this block I laser engraved. I did this one a lot deeper than most of the ones that I've been doing, so it's deeper and thicker lines. This was done on the xTool S1 laser, my 10-watt laser, and it charred a ton, so there was tons and tons of kind of burnt debris. So I actually took an old toothbrush and scrubbed some of that debris off, and that seems to have helped. But we'll see what happens when I start painting, if any of that ends up on the postcard. So I'm using a little Japanese origami postcard for this, and my Kuretake watercolor paints. So let's start with the sky. For skies lately, I have been going for Horizon Blue, which is Kuretake number 69. I like this because it's a good creamy texture, this particular color. So it goes down nice and thick, more like a gouache. So I get a good coverage, and it doesn't tend to bleed as much as some of the other blues. I think I've said before, the cerulean blue, which I love the color of, it's beautiful. I've painted a lot with it, trying to do water, but it's just too watery. I get a really inconsistent color with that, which doesn't work when I'm trying to get a nice solid blue. Let's see. Flip it over, rub it with my spoon. The spoons are just traditionally used. I mean, a lot of people use them for a lot of printmaking methods, but this was what was used by the Provincetown printmakers who developed this technique. Now you can see a little bit of brown around the edges there, and that is charring from the laser engraving. So usually the second time I use a block, the charring goes away. It's just that it gets picked up by the paint on this first go round. And I consider that part of the process, right? I mean, it shows what materials I used, so it's totally okay. And this one I just finished engraving it a few minutes ago, so it smells like wood, which is kind of nice in the fall. It's a pleasant, charred wood smell, kind of like a fireplace going in the background. And folks have asked me, why don't you just paint the whole area in that one color and then press it? Well, this stuff dries really fast, so I need to go in relatively soon, or the paint just doesn't transfer to the paper. There we go. And you can see that the middle part dried a little bit more because that was what I had painted earlier. So that's, again, just kind of part of the process. And if you think using more water would prevent that, all that using more water does is cause the paint to get absorbed by the wood. So you end up with out much paint transferring to the paper. You end up with a lot more paint just going into the wood. And when I'm doing these, I've discovered it's best, for me at least, to paint with the grain of the wood. So you can see here the grain is up and down, so I am going for the most part, up and down. I'll go, I'll go across if I'm trying to get a tight line like that. But when I'm filling, I will use a stroke that goes in the direction of the grain. And also when I'm rubbing on the edge, it's hard to rub over the tape, so I use this little piece of paper. So that's that bit. Just continue on and do the blue. Get a little outline here. Pull some of that down. Painting. So I have tons of photos of seagulls. Living in Provincetown, you end up with a lot of pictures of seagulls. I have tons of video of seagulls too, and all sorts of formations and doing all sorts of things. But my sister is involved in nature things. She's a scientist and does a lot of studies of birds and sea mammals and all sorts of stuff. And she said, "Do you paint any birds?" So I'd posted some of my little time lapses on Facebook. And I said, "No, I haven't really done any birds." Mostly because I'm not confident with my drawing skills, so I tend to shy away from anything trying to look like the subject matter. But I've been practicing birds after she asked, so now I can sketch a seagull without any problem. It may not look like a particular seagull. This one actually does look a lot like the seagull that I photographed. So he's kind of short and stubby, and I think it was a cold day, so it was perched on this piling at the pier. So this is for her. I've done a bunch of pigeons as well. And there's some artists who do gorgeously complex and intricate birds, and that's not me. I like this kind of abstract, simple form. And I try to give animals a little bit of character, so they have a little bit of personality. Okay, let's see what we get here. So I've been looking at alternatives to the good old spoon because my arthritis doesn't like this. Pushing down, my finger will lock up sometimes. There we go. So we got pretty good sharp lines around that. I am content. And if I want to, I can always go back and do another pass with another color. Now we're going to move into the other blue, which is going to be the water. And for that, I'm going to use indigo, which again isn't my favorite because it does tend to be a little watery. It's hard to get a really consistent color, a really solid color. It's a bit streaky, so finding ways to embrace the streakiness. It also can build up and be a bit blotchy, so embracing the blotchiness. Again, you see I'm following the grain of the wood as much as I can. And this also tends to dry really fast. So I probably shouldn't have done quite this large of an area. But you can see already how splotchy that is. And it will actually look like that if I don't fill it in. So I need to go back, fill that in. Get a good coating there. And then do my spoon. So as an alternative to a spoon, I've been looking at there's a Czech company that makes a barren type thing that is actually, it's flat, but it has little tiny ball bearings in it, and it's weighted, so you don't have to apply the pressure. The barren actually applies the pressure because it's weighted, so you can get a really constant amount of pressure. So see, I got some really good grain in that, some really good wood grain, and you can see here where the wood grain is really pronounced. So the paint is really hanging into the wood grain here. I'll show you another way. Sometimes I do this when I'm doing siding on a house, and I don't want to actually engrave every single line. I just want to create the impression of horizontal lines on a house. So I'll do it like this, where I have several adjacent stripes essentially. Pick up more paint here. So you can see you start to get a little bit of a stripy pattern. Great on houses, not so sure if it's that great on the water. See if I can get this whole section in one go. So I'm applying the paint really pretty thickly. Much thicker than I would with most colors, just because it is a dark indigo. I want to get a good pull from this. So I've been looking at those barrens with the ball bearings. I thought, oh, that would be really great. I looked at the prices on them. They're astronomical. They're like $300 for a stainless steel weighted widget with a bunch of ball bearings in it. Way out of my budget. So you can see here where the paint just did what it did, but the stripe stayed, right? So a lot of using, any particular brand of paint is figuring out how that paint works in your given application. And folks use all sorts of different kinds of paints for this, from acrylic to gouache, traditional Western watercolors like I can't think of any of the brands off the top of my head. A Winsor & Newton or a something like that. Notice too, I don't do mixing much. Occasionally I will, but for the most part I just use the colors straight out of the pan. Because Kuretake went to all the trouble of making these beautiful rich colors. Sometimes I will blend them in the pan, so if I want to do some kind of transition, I'll do some sap green to some green yellow, so I don't have a jarring transition. Now for this one, this is one of the unusual colors that is kind of a blend. It's like a gray and a beige, but it's a beautiful worn wood color. So I use it. I've been using it for fences, and I'm gonna go right over the feet. I've been using it for fences, fence posts. Seems like it'll be great for this. And notice how I was able to paint right over those lines where the feet are, and I didn't have to worry. Having these really deep grooves makes it much easier to apply the paint and hopefully get a nice sharp line too. Of course, getting an engraving this deep and with lines this wide takes a while. This is like about 2 hours to print this, engrave it on the laser engraver. And while that may seem like a long time, it's a lot less than doing it by hand. And this wood is birch. It's Baltic birch, so it I don't find the smell problematic. I do have some pine boards, which bring me back to my childhood, cutting wood in the basement with my dad and sneezing the entire time. This pine just makes me sneeze. So laser engraving pine is not my favorite thing. Does pine make anyone else sneeze? I don't know if that's just me. I was just taking a peek at my camera because it times out at like 25 minutes and decides it's done recording, and we're almost at 25 minutes. This is really fun. You can see on that both a combination of the wood grain and the texture of the paper that comes up. So for now I'm sticking with my soup spoon for this, and sticking with this Baltic birch. It performs well enough for my projects here. I was thinking maybe I should try cedar because it smells really nice. So we may see some cedar blocks later on if I can get some offcuts from you know, like a house renovation or something. A lot of people use cedar shingles on their houses, and some porches and fences are made out of cedar. So I thought that might be fun to try. I would have to sand it because a cedar shingle is way too rough to do this, and sanding is not my favorite activity. I will say I'm really enjoying this. painting on this one. So I simplified, obviously simplified the drawing. The sketches could be a lot more complicated, but I went for simple on this guy. And I like it. And I don't always say that. You'll notice on my chatty videos are usually the ones that I like. The videos that, some of the videos I post, I'm like, oh gosh, that looks horrible. But it's all about the process. I think the one that came out the worst in recent memory is the Victorian woman on her bicycle. Oh, that was a nightmare to paint. So I just stuck music under it, and you can, use your own judgment in checking out that one. That needs to be on a much bigger block, and it needs to, because it should have a lot more detail. I just crammed way too much into a little tiny space. And I tried some colors that did not work. Don't make the roadway red, I learned. This is really nice. And I really like this color because it's nice and smooth and creamy and it applies really well. I don't have to fight with it. Really like this. So you can see some of the wood grain, which is great since it's a wood post. Now this little thing over here, it's just a buoy, and I figure it's going to be red because that's the color that I use for random items. And I like, should it be yellow? No, it's going to be red. So Rose Madder Deep is my go-to for oddball little things like this. I thought maybe it could be striped, red on the top and then leave it white on the bottom. Let's see what happens. Now the Rose Madder Deep is a kind of a watery pigment, so sometimes it blobs. Okay, that just looks like some odd blob. So we'll add a little more red on the bottom bit to make it into a little striped buoy. There we go. So now I've got a nice little red striped buoy. I'm going to leave the clouds white because they're fluffy clouds. And for little gull guy is going to get, and I'm calling it a guy just because that's how I think of it, I'm going to give it a little tiny beak. Now here is where I didn't do any lines because I didn't want any. I just want to have a little beak. So you'll see what we get. Now I also did the eye wrong, right? If you want an eye, oh, that beak is not very happy. So the eye should have been the other way around, right? I shouldn't have engraved the eye. I should have just done something else. So I'm going to actually make his body, this part of his body is going to be gray. I'm just going to use gray, number 21. And by making his body gray, that will make the eye pop. And it gives the yellow beak something to connect to. Because right now it's just kind of hanging out there in space. I put this on a little water. I'm not going to make any attempt to try to give it feathery effects or anything like that. I'm just filling in the negative space. Oh, that's not really what I wanted, but we'll keep going. And then I thought I'll do this bit and that bit in gray as well. That, go down here in gray. just a bit. Ooh, excuse me, that was my this guy is attached to hold this to my table. Decided to escape. I'm going to make them all gray because I can. It's my painting. So it has enough line work that it can be a solid color and still have some detail. Oh, that's better. I am bummed that the eye is so minimal. I can go back in and like outline the eye a tiny bit. The camera just shut off. I can go back in and outline the eye, try to give it some definition. Doesn't always work. I'm gonna let it sit for a second. Cross my fingers. Let's see if we made it worse. We're gonna paint his whole face again. That's funny. Oh, that's fine. Okay, I'm happier with that. Don't overwork it. So that's it. That was really simple. That was just a little seagull on a pole in the harbor with a buoy and some clouds. It's just a nice, simple little, bird. And that's all I wanted from this. So there we are. If you enjoy watching these kinds of videos, I have a whole playlist of making Provincetown prints that you can watch. I think this is going to be number 30, although I'm not posting them necessarily in numeric sequence. But that will mean there's about 30 on that playlist. So there are some shorts that show this in time-lapse as well. So you can check that out and see what this looks like in 55 seconds instead of a half hour, whatever this ends up being. So thanks for joining me. If you like this kinds of things, again, there's that playlist. Click that like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again. Bye-bye.